Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to episode 41 of Trail Society, brought to you by our friends over at Freetrail. I'm Corrine Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
And we are here for another week. We've made it. We're doing it once again. Hilly, you guys just survived another cold snap in Boulder. How was it?
Oh my gosh. It was, actually, I think I was like maybe too prepared the first day. Like, I think I dressed for like negative temps. It was like 5 degrees and I was like, I'm wearing 2 pairs of pants. I'm wearing like a puffy jacket. And I was like,
you took the Keely approach. You overdressed.
I was way too hot. And I had I was just way too hot. But hey, it was fun. But then it got like really cold, like -8. And so then I adjusted the run plan that day. But yeah, it was fine because literally by the end of the week, I was running in shorts. Colorado, I have no idea what's going on. But
those temperature swings are wild. Keely and I are heading very, very soon to warmer temps. I head to California and then Arizona in just a couple days, going to Sedona for a team camp ahead of the Black Canyon 100K, where Freetrail is actually going to be one of the sponsors of the live coverage. I'll be doing commentary in studio and in the field alongside Dylan Bowman and Leah Yingling and Finn and Brett. It's going to be really, really awesome. But additionally, we're going to have 2 Freetrail experts racing. Both our very own Keely Henninger and Hannah Allgood will be throwing down in the women's 100K. But Keely, what I really wanted to talk about was your Instagram post from this past week about stress and late cycles. And I thought it was just really, really brilliant to highlight it. And I'm wondering if you can just tell the audience who maybe they're either not on Instagram or they didn't see your post about kind of what that was all about.
I found myself last fall or the end of last fall, like balancing way too much and noticed that my cycle was late a couple times in a row. And at the time I was like, okay, well, I know I'm stressed right now. It's going to go away. Like it's going to be back to normal. And then, fast forward 2 more months coming into this month, it wasn't more normal. It got a little later. And then this last cycle, which kind of prompted the post, was like extremely late. And it
so
just
a longer cycle.
Longer. Yeah, longer.
It's important to highlight there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Longer and longer and longer. So getting further and further apart, which can be a telltale sign of it, like eventually going away. Like your body's trying to tell you like, hey, it's a little stressed right now.
Yeah.
And it all kind of made sense. Like I had definitely been feeling tired. But it kind of all came to a head where this one was really, really late. I also felt just like garbage for like maybe 2 to 2.5 weeks straight. And finally kind of had to look back at my training in the past couple of months and be like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely right on the cusp of being way overcooked and I need to take a step back. And so instead of doing like a 4-week really big build, I took like a full week down in the middle of the normal build with Tyler, a couple of extra days off completely, and kind of let myself reset a bit, just so that I was able to not overcook myself before Black Canyon and hopefully go into Black Canyon feeling really well now. Cause now I'm at my taper and I didn't push through feeling just like crap for another 10-day period that probably wouldn't have mattered at the end of the day anyways. And actually feel a lot more like myself now just from that little reset, which is pretty sweet. I'm very well versed in these kind of things. I see it a lot in athletes I work with. I see it a lot in the community. I've seen it in myself before. You'd think you'd catch it a lot earlier. But turns out that I'm not immune to this. I feel like it took me longer than I would have liked it to see, but
it's a trend, right? You were tracking a trend and
totally.
It's like, I know that for me after like a really big race, a really hard effort on my body, like oftentimes that next cycle is a little bit longer. Like say my normal cycle is like 26 to 28 days. Mm-hmm. My next cycle oftentimes might be as long as like 35 days. Mm-hmm. And then it'll like come back down. But you were seeing, right? It's like the one-off is probably okay. Or it's your body adapting to a big stress, but that 2, 3, 4 months, like the red flags caught up with you, which is good. It's good that the red flag was there.
Totally. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel so grateful that I have that as a red flag. So yeah, I'm glad that I found it and I'm glad I have a coach that I can tell and like, he's totally adaptable to it and was like, cool, we're going to just take this week down and then we'll do another week and kind of play it year by year instead of even being like, you must do this week. It's like, cool, we're going to plan to have this next week be big, but if not, that's okay too.
Yeah. And we've got some menstruation news that we'll touch on here that a lot of you actually sent in via DMs to us. So we want to talk about that in a second. But first, we're going to give a shout out to a sponsor who really makes this all happen for us. That's Athletic Greens. Hopefully Keely and her funk was like, okay, got to make sure I'm taking my Athletic Greens, get that probiotic, prebiotic, all your daily, kind of micronutrients that you need to kind of supplement in and around big training days. And if you would like to try Athletic Greens, you can go over to the website, athleticgreens.com/Trail Society. And there, with your first purchase, you can get a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs. Again, you go over to athleticgreens.com/Trail Society. And doing so helps to support the podcast. And really every subsequent purchase helps to support the podcast there. But on that first purchase, you get that extra vitamin D and some travel packs, which I personally love and will be bringing with me to team camp here in just a week or two. So
yeah. And I feel like, I don't know if you guys have like a go-to way to drink it, but I've recently gone into smoothies and just have them in my car for after my run. And if you
the smoothie queen too,
if you mix the Athletic Greens with like vanilla-ish protein powder and then like blueberries and ginger, like the tanginess of everything, really good. Just plug in my latest smoothie kick.
This is me for tomorrow. This is good. I like
by
this.
ginger, I mean like literally take a little piece of the root of ginger and throw it in the blender. And like it's good.
I'm in. I buy it. I'm in. Sold. Okay. We're talking some news and something that you sent. At least I got a bunch of this in my DMs. I'm sure you guys did as well. And this has to do with stuff going on in Florida right now, but I imagine is happening elsewhere. And that is a lot of stuff was shared about the Florida High School Sports Athletic Association, which is a big long acronym, but essentially the takeaway or the byline you're seeing is Florida wants to force athletes to share their menstrual history. And many of you in a doctor's office, if you have a uterus, have probably been asked, when's your last period? Is your period regular? That's been a very common question in healthcare settings for a very long time. And honestly, until maybe 18 months ago, I probably wouldn't have even second guessed telling my medical provider that information. So it's something that, has changed with Roe v. Wade and some legislation going on in many states in the US in particular. But essentially kind of interesting things going on here is that, as we just mentioned, we're huge proponents of understanding your menstrual cycle and being aware of amenorrhea and your cycle changing. And this is especially true for young athletes, including coaches of young athletes and parents of young athletes. But at a time when abortion access and transgender rights are under attack, and many Americans, ourselves included, fear that their health information could be used against them, this becomes a much trickier situation. Keely, you mentioned that this is a conversation you can have with your coach. You can have with Tyler. You live in Oregon, like you're not worried about some of these health repercussions. Florida is a state with a 15-week abortion ban, surrounded by other states with near total abortion bans, which leaves individuals who are able to get pregnant and who, young athletes, high school athletes who already have less predictable and less regular cycles, puts them in a really tenuous position and puts their parents in a tenuous position as far as like, who needs this information, who should have this information. And really, I think it's going to be case by case, state by state, individual by individual, but I would definitely be creating a lot of pause if I lived in a state where I didn't have access to abortion care, et cetera, was sharing that information willy-nilly, right? Like I live in Washington State. I'm very fortunate, that we do have the protections here for reproductive rights that is not everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think my first thought goes to, it's like you said, it's a complicated situation. I don't like the word forced in any sense of the word of like kind of forcing that information. To do a thing. Right. Especially when it comes to like personal health information. However, I do see there is some sort of positive there. If you're trying to, like we had just, we've talked about this on like just with Keely mentioning like her cycle shifting, right? We trust our coaches to talk to them about that. I think forcing someone to share this information could actually violate that trust relationship, which I think is really important for young girls, especially to have that, especially if it is a male coach. Now, I mean, I see it's like, okay, if we're trying to make this change, like, let's like force this and make it a requirement. Right. But I think that pushback, I see the good that it's trying to ensue by like, okay, let's have this open conversation, but forcing something, I think is maybe the wrong way to go about it.
But in a state too, where you've got such stringent legislature around reproductive rights and around transgender rights, I feel like this information becomes even more sensitive. Like I'm sure I don't know everything behind it as far as like, what are they trying to do? Right? Is this trying to police the bodies of individuals who can become pregnant? Or is this, trying to say, we believe in, healthy athletes and we want, we want to know that they are menstruating regularly because that is an indication of health. But that
I'd like to believe that. I would like to believe that. But I mean, it's like, it's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, reading most of the context, I'd say you can infer that that is their general consensus, is that they want to gather this information to be able to better inform the trajectories of their athletes. But my first question to that is, well, what are they actually going to do with that data? Are they actually well-versed enough? And are they well-versed enough in female physiology to know what to do with menstrual cycle data, right? Because my favorite thing when I've worked in corporate science was that people love to get the cart before the horse. They're like, oh, we're going to get all this data, but we actually have no clue what to do with it. And so, I would love to see their plan with this data to be like, oh, we want to gather menstrual cycle data going back X months because we know that looking for inconsistencies in menstrual cycle or lack of menstrual cycle or, slowly lengthening menstrual cycle might lead towards amenorrhea. And we want to be able to detect that in our female athletes. Like if they had a plan for what to do with this information, I'd feel a little bit more confident in it. And then my second thing would be to ask if they've already integrated their collegiate system with medical providers, then is this going to be HIPAA protected? Because if this is going to be HIPAA protected by their interaction with a physician, then in my mind, it would be a little safer than saying the colleges have control.
But this isn't even college. This is predominantly like this instituted at a high school level, which so you're talking about minors, which is like even like more tenuous versus a collegiate system. And it's like,
but I mean, it does have to start somewhere though. I mean, I
education has to start somewhere, but
and this could be a step to it. I mean, I do see this as like the details that Keely was saying, like, I think that's really important, but I mean, having worked and like, all of us are very familiar with scientific research. Sometimes you actually do need like all of the data before you can draw conclusions. And it's a way of actually, like I went to graduate school, literally just last year, I published a paper and I haven't been in graduate school for like however many years. And like, I was gathering all the data, like doing the experiments, but we didn't know what to do with it yet until we had more information. And so that is also how science works. But there's a lot more involved when it involves like, I mean, like you just mentioned, like minors and things like that.
Reproductive rights and gender like affirming rights, like all these things are extra tenuous feelings. So I would say
interesting to see where it will live, the data.
Yeah, exactly. And who is protected in that. And it's like, I want people to be able to trust their coaches. I want people to be able to trust their parents. I want that trust to be, so that that you can like confide in them. I know that a lot of people's college coaches, there's good and bad people and good and bad coaches and good and bad parents everywhere. But, like from personal experience with my team in college, like our coach was one of the people that we could go to if we needed help, like they are your parent, abroad in a lot of way, right? They become your guardian, even as you're no longer a minor in a lot of those settings. But
sorry, one more thing. I think that in this context, they also don't really know like what is normal for a female when they're this young versus not normal yet. And so like, to your point, I don't know if it's necessary to gather at this age or worst case, I would never want this to be something that inhibits an athlete because they're misinterpreting the data. Like, oh, this person's not menstruating, therefore let's pull them. Well, maybe that person's never going to get their cycle and it just requires more information into why.
But also, I mean, I hate to say this, but like, when are we going to start gathering this data then? I mean, I'm someone who didn't go through, I didn't even get my first menstrual cycle until 16. Like some women, some girls, and they start their period at 12 or like earlier. And so it's like, well, if we're going to make a change, we've talked about this on the podcast before, if we're going to make a change from, implement like education standpoint, right? Like working with young female athletes, getting them in sport, keeping them in sport longer. It starts young. It doesn't just start at the collegiate level. It starts well before that. And if we don't, I mean, women go through puberty, earlier than guys. And
But so, again, I think education and I think individualized personal, like just being aware and tracking your own cycle, right, is a lot different than this being forcefully gathered into a system that we don't understand, in a state that has a near total abortion ban.
Well, and regardless, like, put Florida out of it, I still think that, like, and I know that's like currently what we're talking about, but like hypothetically, if this is another state, if it, like, this could be good if you have that data protected somewhere. Yes. It's a starting point with all of the studies that we actually would want to do on like female athlete physiology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think still tricky with minors.
Yes. But I mean, technically at that point, she is now a woman. I know technically she can't vote, but like, you know, if you're going, you can have a baby, but like, so then when do you consider her being a minor or not?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. Consent. It's all about consent.
Yeah, totally. No, I think like that we're all in favor of tracking menstrual cycle of young women and older women. I think that is extremely
of anyone
important,
who can menstruate.
Right?
Okay. We keep saying women, but it's non-binary individuals, anyone who can menstruate, right? Like that is important, is we're all in favor of people having the knowledge, being able to track their cycle, having a better understanding of what that means broadly. And some of that's going to be in a research setting, but I don't think we should force everyone to be in a research setting. I encourage you to opt into a research setting because the three of us are scientifically inclined. But I think once again, as Hillary mentioned, it's that forced component of it. And that is critical when it comes to consent. And that is force. Force is never, right? Consent can never be given with force involved. So,
right. So maybe it's and like you said, like education as to why they want that. And then like you can opt in, but that would be great. I still think it would be great data to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we're going to argue about it being good data. I think it's the way in which.
But this is also like science when you're talking about dealing with humans. This is why clinical trials fail all the time.
If Oura Ring wants to do a study where we deliver rings to a bunch of adolescent females who are going to be going through sports, we get to track them for years and years and years, I would be down to lead that study. Just throwing that out there.
I think this could be like,
let's do this.
Exactly. This is a sponsorship pitch. Oura Ring. Let's like put this in your ear. Let's go.
We've been using it. We're on board. Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic, which is equally heated and is inclined towards non-binary individuals and women. But it's the UTMB Cares program. And it's been interesting because I'm on the Trail Running Association, and Sophie Powers is working with one of our pillars is like equity and equality, but also diversity and inclusion. And that's kind of their shared branch. And Sophie is part of that group. And she's been a very loud proponent of the most recent UTMB Cares initiative. And I would just love to start by reading Sophie's Instagram post, if that's okay, because I think it did a pretty good job of articulating a lot of our initial sensations maybe about UTMB Cares. If you like read more than the what seemed like lip service from UTMB a little bit about what UTMB Cares actually entails. And so Sophie, if you don't know, I feel like there are viral photos of her from a number of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, of breastfeeding her. It might have been actually right before the pandemic. It might've been 2019. Breastfeeding her child in the middle of UTMB at Courmayeur, I think, actually like sitting in the bleachers in the like in the gym, breastfeeding her child. And so she wrote on the launch of UTMB Cares, caring means breaking down barriers for all women, not helping a few climb over. Today, UTMB launched their UTMB Cares initiative. I've been waiting for this for months. They carried out a big survey of women and promised to help get more of us on the starting line. This is what they found. We don't have enough time to train. We struggle to juggle family life and our own goals. Who knew? Laugh crying emoji to follow that. So it's essentially our own fault that there's less than 10% of women on the start line, not theirs. And all we need is a little mentoring, right? Because the UTMB Cares Women's Initiative is about mentoring athletes to get them to the start line. There's nothing in there about the barriers they control, that they are free to take down for all women, not just a chosen few. So how about having inclusion imagery? Women of all shapes and colors, equal race coverage of female athletes, no tolerance of aggressive behavior by male racers, finisher gillets that fit us, more than like kind of gendered garments. But then again, there's some issues there. Better toilet provision and period products. Oh, and even not making women pay twice if we've had a baby and yet another UTMB qualifying event for stones, ? What they do encourage are nonprofits to submit projects that support their aims. Right? Like, I think that she has a lot to say, and I think she's a very powerful person, and she is a person that's working alongside the PTRA. again, the Trail Running Association and UTMB to try to kind of come to a better understanding of what the actual needs are of getting above that 10% women participant range that, I think last year was like 9.2%. So I thought it was very interesting. I think that a big organization like UTMB should have initiatives that are contributing to society in a positive way, but they seem to be missing the mark is how I generally feel about UTMB Cares. And I don't know what your guys' initial takes were, or if you have any other inside information as to, is it more than lip service right now?
I'm really not sure because there's just not that much information about it. Like, so to me, it kind of seems like it is. You
can spend €1,000 or pounds or whatever to get a charity bib, and that money will go to UTMB Cares. But it's, again, you're a big organization who is making plenty of money off of us, off of all racers. Right. And it's not there's not this kind of contribution from the organization itself. It feels like.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Boston Athletic Association, who runs the Boston Marathon,
sort of
just allowed people who are pregnant to defer their entry to the next year. So,
which honestly, probably isn't enough time for some people, right?
No,
like a 1-year deferral.
Well, no, do the math on that. Yeah. And then you have to have a qualifying race. I'm sorry, but look at Amanda Basham, what she's trying to do right now. She's trying to requalify for Western and she's literally going to New Zealand. She's running TrailRunner after doing black,
yeah. Well, and that's because for sponsorship spots, and there's a rollover situation there in which it's,
no, she has to do another qualifying because she missed it from being pregnant.
But if you are getting a sponsorship spot akin to getting into the lottery, you have to have a qualifier in order to run the race. And so that's their way of leveling it for everyone.
I do agree with that. But think about that for someone even not getting a sponsorship spot. If you deferred your race in 1 year period, that's not enough time.
I know, but Western States says that you can defer indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is different. Right. And so it's that runner's choice. I understand that being pregnant is I'm not saying that. I'm not saying about the pregnancy part, but I'm saying it's your choice to only defer a year versus having to get a qualifier. I've got other friends on sponsor spots who they also had to figure out how to get a qualifier in because they were told they got a sponsorship spot.
Right.
Right. And they weren't pregnant, obviously, but they still are required. So it's kind of but she could defer again. She could get that spot could roll to her next year.
She doesn't have a spot yet.
No,
I think she's trying to golden ticket.
She's trying to get a golden ticket.
She's trying to get in. Yeah.
Yeah. But there has been a specific pregnancy deferral sponsorship.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whereas UTMB does not have that initiative. Boston Marathon just implemented that initiative as of a week ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that the UTMB Cares program reminds me of a really big corporation. If you read into the Cares program, it's just kind of a bunch of fluff, a lot of fluff words and big words kind of smattered in there. And it doesn't amount to much is my interpretation.
Yeah. To reduce their carbon footprint, they're going to, have a bus on course that they tried to initiate within a week of the race last year and didn't quite work out for them because they didn't have enough buses to get people on course. But they said that's going to reduce the carbon footprint, but yet they want us to travel all over the world to run races to get stones to apply to their lottery, which also doesn't reduce the carbon footprint, because if you live in a lot of places, you can't get there easily unless you live in Western Europe. There aren't a lot of options. If you live in Cape Town, if you live in South Africa, if you live in New Zealand or Australia, if you live in Asia, if you live in a lot of the US, North America, Central America, South America, it's really hard to get to that single qualifier. So it's
and for the women's issue, I guess is what they were saying, to address their 9% start rate for those longer distance races.
They're going to allow mentorship,
a mentor program.
In which the pros who they don't take care of are going to mentor women who don't have enough time to train into getting to the start line.
Right. I know.
So giving up more
what does
time.
that mentorship mean?
Giving up more time.
Are you giving these new women money to go race?
Right. Are you providing childcare?
That's what I'm saying. Money for childcare. That'd be great. Yeah.
Money to race, money for childcare, money for coaching. What is, how are we going to just make them do more? It's just very confusing.
Yeah. So we're not entirely impressed. Maybe you're not impressed either. Maybe you had no idea this was going on and now you're as confused as we are. Either way, these are things that are being worked on, but I feel like with any big organization, it's a little bit of David and Goliath, right? Like we are more agile than the big corporation. And so we had to kind of push them to walk things back pretty continuously. And this is another one of those things that by the time race day rolls around, there will probably be a better thing in place, but it's like they keep just putting their foot in their mouth over and over again because they don't ask for help. And they just like, they make up these things that are just kind of silly. So there's that. So yay, happy news. So happy, joy, like all the fun things. Let's talk about the technically Camille Herron's not the author of this article, yes. But it's an article that features her heavily, and it's called "Skip the Long Run." It was put out in TrailRunner Mag. I appreciate everything that TrailRunner Mag is doing, but we had some kind of questions about this article in particular, and some kind of like things that we think are good, and things that we're like kind of think are maybe misleading. So, who would like to start on the Camille Herron "Skip the Long Run" article?
So the article is not written by Camille, but it is kind of in her voice as it discusses a lot of her training. And it basically discusses her philosophy around long runs and how she has learned over time to eliminate quote unquote long runs from her workout regimen. And it talks through, she used to run marathon distance often throughout the week for her marathon racing. And now she is closer to shorter long runs that are paired with a double later in the day. And they're arguing that this kind of, double training session instead of one ultra distance training session is more advantageous for bone health and more advantageous as a training philosophy than running long runs. But the article fails to mention like her weekly mileage in general and like what she classifies as a long run. And it fails to acknowledge that those are still long runs. Like a 20-mile long run is still a long run. Like, I don't know many ultra runners who train over 50K often. And so to me, the article is a little bit, it's a little misleading as it fails to discuss some of these nuances of the article that could lead some novice runners astray when interpreting it and being like, oh, well, this means I can just double and increase my mileage that way and I'll be fine. And that's not necessarily what the article is meaning at all.
Right.
Yeah, I could see people running like way more than they should or way less than they should and not like really getting to this happy medium that will probably work for many individuals.
Right. And it did say like in there, like a case study of one, like using Camille as like, her like discussing her training and what she does. I did think that there's some interesting studies cited in the article, like some
that are real, right? Like there's some scientific backing in this for sure.
Like the whole idea about the idea of a double, right? This isn't new in training for professional athletes at all. It's like your bones specifically, we're talking about bone stress. This is also for tendons and ligaments too. But if you stress yourself with like she's saying a 15-mile run or maybe up to a 22 or 20-mile run, you have a period of rest for about 4 to 6 hours. Then your bones do actually have another, like they can reset and have your bone cells can then readapt to a stressful, like pounding environment, like say a second run later in the evening in this like double thing. And your tendons and ligaments can respond similarly. There's like, they're cited in articles. This whole idea, that's definitely not wrong, but it also fails to mention like Camille's history as a runner, right? Like she's been doing this. She's been a runner since she's been, I don't even know, like very young. And I think that's also it. Like it fails to address like why athletes might adopt this methodology if they're injury prone, if they're, time crunched, or they, like gait, they don't have a proper running gait, or, you need to incorporate other stresses. Like I think the idea to like think about bone stress and running in that like mindset is great. But there's some other details that are missing, and that's like a kind of a bigger conversation.
Like two 1 hour runs. So say like, this Camille runs 120 to 140 miles a week. She's running 20 miles a day, most days, broken up over 2 runs. Like it's not insignificant. That's much more than many people run. She doesn't have any long runs that you might expect to take a little bit of that burden off of her every day. But, she runs every single day. She hardly takes a rest day. She runs a lot. What I think that like what this could be interpreted as is like, oh, do I do a 2-hour run today, or do I do 2 1-hour runs today? And if you're someone coming back from injury, yeah, the 2 1-hour runs might be what you want. But for a lot of athletes, like it's hard to recognize that like a 2-hour stimulus is different than 2 1-hour stimulus or stimuli. And then it comes to like the time crunched parent or the time crunched runner in general. Like, I think that there are a lot of factors that were glossed over that don't kind of like always ring true. The science is interesting, but once again, it's like, you're right. It is a case study of one. If you're going to run 120 miles a week, maybe this is the way to do it. But I think the reality is this is an article for the general population, and most humans aren't running half that a week.
Exactly. That's kind of where my mind went, was that there's absolutely no proof that adding in an additional hour post a 20-mile run is good. There's no advantage to that in most runners' lives. Like, most studies that come out looking at the general population show high correlation between number of running sessions per week or volume of training runs and injury. And so like, we can't take these findings and then just like expect it to translate to the general population and be like, oh yeah, just run more and you'll be fine. Like, no, that is not good. There's no studies out there that say this is good for you. And so like, I know it says N of 1, but I also know like the runner mind and how neurotic it is and how it'll latch on to things that are like giving it a reason to run more. And I just don't want people to read this and all of a sudden be like, oh, well, I run 40 miles a week now, but if I just add an hour to all of my days and, then I'll get a little more. Like, that's not going to necessarily be advantageous.
Or like my bones will adapt more, right? Like one stress rest than another stress, but also
maybe jump rope in the afternoon instead. Like take some collagen and then jump rope for 5 minutes. Like, that's probably better for most people.
There we go.
I did want your guys' opinion on my one thought though. Like, how do you guys think this might impact the fasting response? So like, when you do run these really long runs, like 3 to 5 hours, obviously your body kind of goes into this starvation mode, which can impact cortisol levels later in the day. Like my one thought about this that could be a positive is like, potentially this allows you to mitigate that increase in stress hormone because you're not ever out there for that long, that you're actually getting into that state.
Well, the easiest way to mitigate that is just eat when you run and eat afterwards. So as long as you're doing that, it should be fine.
Let's be honest. When people are going out there for 5 hours, even if you're eating relatively well, you're going to be in a much bigger hole than if you were out for 2 hours. So I'm just wondering.
I think that if you can time your recovery and then have like eat well and then, digest whatever and then go out again. But this also goes back to like another point, right? It's like your bone cells have sex hormone receptors. So if your sex hormones are low, like this adding in that extra run and just being like, it could be a slippery slope, right? Like, and if you're not eating enough and you already have low sex hormones, then your bones are not going to be remodeling and it's just going to lead to injury.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we should also point out that Camille races particularly frequently over the marathon distance. So it's not like she never runs a long run before she runs 100-mile event. Like she runs many long runs.
Those are long runs, aren't they? Like a race is a pretty long run.
It's a long run.
I'm just kidding.
And then I think that kind of like a real world example that I had recently is I had an athlete reach out to me and the question essentially was, is it on a scale of 1 to 10, is it a terrible idea to run a 50-mile race 3 weeks before my 100K? And I said, it's not a good idea. And then I wanted to know more about like the reasoning behind this 50-mile. Like, was it something they really wanted to do? Were they running it with a friend? Like, what was the reason? No, it's a training run for the 100K. And I said, well, ideally a 50-mile to 100K distance, if I'm using that for a training run for say 100K or 100-mile, like I put that, 6-8 weeks out from race day, like at a minimum. It turns out there's a 55K option. And I was like, well, why don't you do the 55K option? And then you still could back it up with a slow, easy, longer run the next day. You could go out for like 30K, for example, and trying to explain the difference between like why not run 50 miles in one go versus 50 miles over 2 days? And it's similar reasoning of the hole you get in after 50 miles. Obviously this is like a slightly different argument to the Camille Herron article in general, but just thinking about dose and load and body response and recovery. And it's like, I understand both points here, but I think that, we have to think critically about that for different individuals in different situations. And I just don't see where any of us have athletes that are running 120 to 140 miles a week who would benefit from this strategy specifically.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head though. Yeah. I think like the benefits to this article or how you translate it to something like your athlete had where they want to run 50 miles or they want to run 100K as a way to prep for a 100-mile.
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging that, breaking it up into 2 much shorter runs is going to have a lot less muscle damage and kidney damage and cardiac marker damage or inflammation, right? Like a 100K does, like a 9-hour effort does, is definitely something we can get behind. Like we've seen that in the studies, like ultra distance stuff does lead to a lot of muscle damage and other things. Mm-hmm. And so if you can mitigate that by by just splitting that up over 2 or 3 days and actually getting proper recovery and not getting all of those inflammatory markers is super elevated, like that would be helpful.
Agreed.
That up over 2 or 3 days and actually getting proper recovery and not getting all of those inflammatory markers is super elevated. Like that would be helpful.
Agreed. I guess the question is for you all is, do you think we have enough time to talk about sports psychology or should we just go to our meat and potatoes?
We should go to meat and potatoes. And we'll do this next week.
We'll bring it on.
We'll bring it on. Yeah.
Don't worry. We'll talk more sports psych in a little bit. But before we do, we're going to replug our social media. So if you have not yet followed, if you are on Instagram, if you don't have Instagram, go join Instagram just to follow trail.society. That is our podcast Instagram page. We're going to be putting out original content there. That's going to link to episodes that you can send your questions into. You can send in those shout outs into. That can all be in that one place. So again, we have a Trail Society Instagram account now, and that is at trail.society. So we'll see you over there. You can slide into our DMs. Quickly too, there weren't much for results, but this episode is coming out. We're recording pre-TrailRunner, and then the next thing that will happen is Black Canyon. So 2 golden ticket races are coming up. We do not have those results for you yet, but the next time we chat, we will be talking post Black Canyon, and hopefully we'll have some fun tales from the trails. Before we dive into meat and potatoes, we have to do one more ad read, and that is for the feed. We love the feed so stinking much. I'm actually kind of upset that I'm not like officially home again for like another couple of weeks because I really want to put in a feed order, but it can't securely be delivered to my house if I'm not here. So I'm hurting a little bit for some snacks. If you also want snacks, you can go to www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. There, every quarter, you can get a $15 credit. Every 90 days, you can get a $15 credit to be used towards any purchase at the feed, any snacks you want, recovery tools, coffee, you name it, waffles, obviously. But even cooler, we're working on some fun merchy items with the feed that is like for Trail Society specifically. And we've seen the first draft, or I guess the final draft that's going to be printed. And we're so excited for you all to see it soon as well. So if you, again, www.thefeed.com/Trail Society. Go check it out.
We did it. They're really cool. We're so excited.
They're awesome.
They're very, very, very cool. Okay. Meat and potatoes, inspired by you, the listeners. We got an email from someone whose name escapes me. I'm really sorry about that. But you had great questions. It's actually going to be the theme of 2 episodes, not just 1 episode. The first one being, why have a coach? Right? You wrote in and you said you've spoken a lot about your personal coaches and how important that relationship is. And we've also talked about our athletes and how much we enjoy those meaningful relationships. And so does everyone need a coach? We're going to kind of talk about like finding a coach, the coach process, what that relationship could look like. And so polling the audience here, which is an audience of 3 of us, because it's a podcast. Keely, Hillary, does everyone need a coach? It's an audio format, but we can raise our hands, right?
I'm going to say the business woman in me says yes, but then absolutely not. No, not everyone needs a coach.
So I guess that leads to a question, and maybe Keely, you can answer this for us. It's like coaching comes in so many different individual flavors, and so just kind of like, obviously all of us have enough experience and educational background, and actually many of the listeners do as well, that they don't technically need a coach, right? You could definitely coach yourself. So Keely, why do you personally have a coach?
I work with a coach so that I don't have to think about my running agenda and my future running goals and think about that on a daily level alongside my current training, because I tend to go down a rabbit hole with my own training. And I also don't want that stress. I don't want to have to wake up in the morning and be like, oh, where am I at in my training program? Okay, what am I going to run today? I don't need that level of control over my running. And I think that having someone else kind of lead you towards your running and have your goals in mind is really, really helpful. I think it's also helpful for people who have a lot of stuff going on, because like keeping all of that compartmentalized and having time to actually think through your running in a healthy way is really, really difficult.
Hillary, why do you personally have a coach?
Yeah, I mean, for many of the same reasons that Keely just mentioned. I mean, I know what to do, right?
But are you going to do it is the question.
Exactly. I need someone else to kind of have that authority. So I just don't have to think about it. And then, I can just trust that process, trust my coach, and know that, he has my best interests. And also I think there's just knowing that someone else has that perspective, because if like you're so close in it, I feel like you lose perspective. I lose perspective. So I think that's the main thing that I have. And yeah, I don't normally like being told what to do, but Adam can tell me what to do, and I really like it.
Yeah, 100%. If I didn't have a coach, I would run 2 hours easy every day. I would never take a day off.
I wouldn't do workouts either. I would just I'd be running 6 hours every day in the mountains like you'd never see me.
Yeah, no, Hillary would be gone. Yeah, I'd run 2 hours easy every day. I'd never do workouts, and I would never take a day off, both of which are things that I need.
Yep.
And so I rely on someone else to tell me to do those things. I can tell other people to do those things, but it's nice to have someone tell me to do those things and also be that person to like bounce ideas off of. But I like what both of you said. It's like, you don't have to think about it anymore. And when I talk to new athletes, that is something that comes up. It's this idea of like, we can give them back mental bandwidth, right? It's like, you don't have to figure out what information is right for you. Like, how do you what am I going to do tomorrow or the next day? Or if I miss this day, how am I going to fix it later, et cetera? Like, I think that mental buyback is what I call it, is so, so critical. But like, why else? I think when we're all doing athlete consults pretty regularly, taking on new athletes, have a little bit of roster turnover, obviously also very full rosters, I think, as well. But these trends emerge, right? Like why individuals are approaching you or approaching us for coaching. And I'm wondering if there's any other specific benefits or specific reasons you like hear from athletes that are coming in for potential coaching.
I mean, like trying something for the first time or trying something new, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that I've got because how I started running, I was in grad school and most of my miles were in the city, and like this idea of like, can I be a trail runner, but living in a city, right? Like, how do you do that? Like that, or, just trying a new distance, a new type of race. Something new, I think, in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of athletes reach out because they have these new race goals that seem pretty daunting, and they need the accountability, and they also need the structure and the advice because they don't have any background in training. And so they're like, I don't know how to get ready for this. This is extremely different than what I'm used to. But another reason I've been getting a lot of outreach lately is around previous injuries, current injuries, and fueling, and that kind of messy relationship of, maybe you've coached yourself for a couple of years and you find yourself just continually becoming injured, battling with symptoms of red S, all of these things. And finally, maybe you've come to a place where you're like, actually, I really need a coach to help me through this and to be able to mitigate my training loads so that I'm not digging myself in a hole, and I'm not getting overuse injuries from running on a really, really broken and really tired body. And so I think a lot of other people seek coaches when they've kind of reached that limit and they really want to change, or at least try to change, and, work towards a different goal instead of just beating themselves down again and again and again.
Totally. And I think one of those trends that's interesting, and this is kind of I feel like I think I've said this, not on this podcast, but in an interview before, of like how, how like dogs and like their people kind of start to look alike, right? Or like, I think that athletes are kind of the same way. Like, I think you start to particularly like we are all in a position in our coaching and in our platforms now where it's like people know who we are, they know what we stand for, they know our personal history, like we're public people. And so I definitely see trends in like athlete consults of like, oh, I align with your thinking. I gravitate towards you because I've had this similar experience, or I've been through this thing. And I'm wondering if either one of you are seeing that as well, of like people reaching out to you specifically because it's like, oh, like you understand what I'm going through on like a very personal level.
Yeah. I mean, like Keely said too, I mean, the injury, like recovery, obviously I have a lot of personal experience.
No one's
with
falling
that.
off a cliff though, right? Like they're not
Yeah, no, that would be a little bit
too on the
I don't know
nose.
if I'd coach that person. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I would. I'd first send them my book and then be like, talk to me after you read this. But no, I mean, that for sure, obviously something that you have personal experience with. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of athletes that I coach who want to get into more technical mountainous running. And I got, my start in sky running and, on that type of terrain, right? So having that knowledge base and like, this is, is this normal? Or how to, build up vertical gain in a week, like leading up to this race. Certainly. But I have actually had this and we've had to part ways, like, so kind of break up the coaching relationship because
which happens, which is normal.
It's totally normal, right? It's like any relationship, right? If you're not getting what you need from either side, either the athlete or the coach, but if they were trying to we are both public, all of us are public facing. And so following me on Strava and then wanting me to coach them in hopes that my training their training would look like my training. And I think that is a mistake because
that's actually a really good point.
Yeah. And it's like, and I've had, other people, it's like, cause I train, fairly high volume in terms of hours. And so it like people can reach out expecting that. And I'm just like, okay, wait just a minute. Like this is still like, I've worked up to this point. This is even what we were talking about with Camille, right? Like in that article, we still don't know what she does on a daily basis. Like, yes, this is her running history, right? We're just seeing a snapshot. So that can be tempting to search for a coach, to basically be the training that you want yours to look like, but I think it is normal also to search for a coach who's into the same kinds of things that you are.
Yeah. Or understand. So you want a sense of community, belonging, accountability, knowledge, experiences, and those are all really important things that I think we see athletes look for and receive in that coach athlete relationship. But I guess kind of the next piece of that puzzle is like going through those consults in general. Like I think shopping around for a coach is like really kind of funny and weird because you're shopping for a relationship. Like if you didn't want a relationship out of it, you could like go buy a cookie cutter plan off the internet and it would save you a lot of money. And so, like how do we've all done a lot of consults. I think we've all done some consults when finding a coach as well, or at least talking to some different people. And I'm wondering, like if someone wants a coach and they want to go through that process of finding the right person for them, what does that even look like? Like, how many people should they talk to? Like what should they be asking or looking for in that consult to see if they're the right fit? No wrong answers.
I mean, this has been like Keely's life, right? At the moment, I'll do a quick little thing, but then I think Keely has had like a lot of experience. Like it's very timely. But I mean, I think, yeah, like I don't think it's necessarily like it's like a formula, right? The math side of me would love that. Like talk with X number of whatever, and then you're bound to get your right coach. But it could be the first person that you talk to. Totally. Honestly, like I think it's like any relationship, like going off a gut feeling. Coaching first and foremost, I think, is based on communication. And if you can find someone that you can communicate well, have those rough conversations, and I think you get that sense from someone pretty early on. And almost a sense that you can develop a relationship where you can learn to trust one another. I think that trumps all. So if you can have that conversation on the first one, you could have it on the 10th.
I call it finding someone who speaks your language, finding someone who you're not intimidated to have conversations with, to ask questions of, because it's not, I don't know. I tell people I'm not a good dictator. I'm not a good dictator. Like I want people to be an active part of that relationship and have questions. Like questions are good. That means that you're engaged. But it's like, you got to find that person that you jive with. Keely, you are personally fielding a lot of intake forms for Freetrail experts and then helping them find the right coach amongst the Freetrail expert staff. I'm kind of wondering, like what should people be asking their coach? What should they be looking for in these like kind of consult processes?
Yeah. So I think right off the bat, you want to get a better understanding of how many athletes your coach is coaching, because I think if you're looking for something that's a little low touch, you can probably work with a coach that coaches a good amount of athletes. But if you really want that coaching relationship to be a pretty good relationship where you get to talk to your coach regularly, and you feel like your coach is really putting a lot of time into your training program by investigating the races you're going to do, investigating the terrain you live by, like, then you really need to take that into consideration, because there's there's just so much time in the day. And if somebody's coaching 30, 40, 50, 60 athletes, there's
100 plus athletes
time in the day to do those things. And I'd say,
right.
The other thing would be the coaches, experience not only racing, but experience coaching and being well-versed in certain race distances. Mm-hmm. Like I commonly turn down athletes who want to train for 100 plus mile distance races because I have no experience in that realm. I've never researched that realm, and I have never done any sort of, continuing education in that realm. And so I don't feel comfortable coaching those athletes. So I think looking for a coach who has the skill set in the kind of racing or running or training that you want to do is really important. And then also finding a coach that's willing to admit if they don't, or admit that like, hey, actually, I'm not that great at bringing back an athlete from injury because I'm not a PT or I'm not a doctor. And being able to admit that to you and welcoming the input from other specialties when they acknowledge that they're not a specialist in that space is really important. Like, I love hearing a coach say that they can't help you in a space because they're not an expert in it more than anything else, because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a physical therapist. And so there's just things that are not inside my realm of coaching that I will not help you with because it would be a disservice.
Oof, yeah, I think that's a favorite topic. That's so important. So I think we're going to jump to that. And then I've got kind of a side question that's kind of sassy more than anything. But okay, so it's kind of the idea of like, can your coach be your everything, right? It's this idea of like, what needs do you have and how are those needs met? And it's like, well, your coach can have a lot of certs. Certs don't mean everything, right? Like they can be important. They can be continuing ed. They can be part of their learning experience, but like, you don't have to have a cert to coach, nor does your coach have to have a cert to be a good coach. That being said, like continuing education, recognizing that you don't know everything, I think should be a sought after attribute of a coach, like a coach who doesn't who understands they don't know everything. And so, right. Like you've got that, you're not a dietitian, you're not a clinical psychologist, you're not a physical therapist. Maybe you are, and if you are, like, good on you, because you've got an extra skill that many of us don't have. You're not a physician, et cetera. And so it's like athletes can expect a lot from you, but I think it's important to expect athletes to have a team. And that's a question I ask every single new athlete I take is, who's your team? I'm one person of that team. So how do you handle that, Hillary, as a coach? And how do you defer to that individual's team of people that they need to be surrounding themselves with?
Right. And this is something that's, I think, really important because it can be tempting to want to be the athlete's everything. Right. And this is something I've learned from my coach too. It's like, it's his job to be responsible for my training. And it's, my job to do that and communicate to him how it's going, honestly. But it's not his job to be my sports psychologist. It's not his job. It's my job to say, okay, like I'm struggling with A, B, and C. I'm going to talk about it with my sports psychologist. Or, if I'm having problems with nutrition, then, seeing a nutritionist. That's my coach might have knowledge about nutrition for race day. I certainly do. I mentioned that I have, a lot of personal history coming back from injury. Does that make me a qualified PT? Absolutely not. So, or, someone to talk about, are you eating enough during your injury recovery? Absolutely not. But I think it is your job as a coach to be able to encourage, or if you have touch points of people in the industry and in the community, wherever your athlete lives, getting them in contact with the right people. I think that's what I see my job as a coach being, providing some sort of guidance. But again, I'm not a strength coach. I might have some personal knowledge with it, but that doesn't make me an expert in that field. And so anytime I'm dealing with an athlete coming back from injury, I'm always saying, okay, I'm going to defer to your PT. Like if you want me and your PT to be in contact, awesome. More than willing to do that.
That's so important because I think I have had many conversations with athletes, dietitians, with athletes. I've had conversations with athletes, mental health counselors. I've had conversations with athletes, strength and conditioning coaches, their PTs, et cetera. Like I have made time in my day to connect with those people if the athlete wants me to, or if I encourage the athlete to connect with that person if they're having a really hard time with something. Once again, that is up to the athlete, right? How much communication in between providers they want to have, but it is, and which is something that's unique to Freetrail experts, is that you can have that very in-house communication. If you're using people within that group, from coaching, mental health, nutrition, dietitian stuff. But I think that, you could do that within your own team as well. I'm on a text thread right now with one of my athletes and their PT, and he screenshot his training peaks for the 2 weeks. And, like we're going to try to get on a call together so that we can mesh the strength that he is doing with this PT with the running and cycling that he's doing to recover from kind of a nagging injury. But I think that it's so, so important to recognize that you can't be everything. It's not, you don't lose value by saying you don't know something, or that like you'd be better, the athlete would be better served by seeing someone else. So
you're doing them a disservice if you try to help them in an area that you're not well equipped in.
Right. It's like being too much of a control freak. It's like also learning to trust the people that are the experts, right? They might not be.
And trust your athletes too.
Right. And like people on the ground, right? Like I'm lucky enough if I have like people here in Boulder and I can recommend them to people that I know personally or that I've worked with. But that's not the case for everything. So it's also like trusting like your athlete that they've chosen you as a coach. They trust you in communication. They're going to be able to choose other people if they choose or need to expand their team.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my sassy question. Does being a professional runner qualify you to be a coach? As 3 professional runners who all coach, does being a professional runner? Absolutely not.
I put that question in there, and I think Corrine, maybe you already had it in there. I think I put it in there twice for emphasis, because I think no, like that's like the next thing you see. It's really funny. Like, I mean, I got into coaching. I was a coach, like in tennis before I was a running coach. I'm also like, we all have degrees in science. I think it's like, in us to maybe like be coaches, but like, man, just because you like, win a race and you see the next thing, I'm taking on athletes. It's like, okay.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, not all professional runners are good coaches. Not all coaches are great runners. Like it's one of those things where I, for the longest time, did not like identifying as a coach, which was like a weird statement to say. Like I coached junior skiers and runners for a long time, but started coaching, professionally, like, full-time job status during grad school because I was living in Vancouver, and Vancouver's expensive and I was very poor. And I was like, I need extra cash. But it was one of those things that then I kind of became a professional runner, like along the way there. And I, for the longest time, did not like saying I was a coach. Like Steven's friends would ask me what I did for work, and I'd be like, I do a lot of odd things, I guess. Like I would like skirt the question because I didn't want people to think that, oh, I'm coaching to allow me to be professional athlete, et cetera. Like that it is a profession that you can take really seriously. And I think that there was a long time where I was planning my escape from coaching, like, because akin to planning my escape from professional running, in which I was like, well, this can't last forever. Therefore I have to have a backup career. I need to go back to school. I need to do X, Y, or Z. I was really uncomfortable with the idea of being a coach for potentially like the long haul. Because in my mind, like it was still conflated with this idea that it was attached to my running career, and recognizing that those things they can be separate. And so being a professional runner does not make you a good coach. There are professional runners who are very good coaches though. But that is not a qualification I would put up very high on my list of things in looking for a coach.
No. Yeah. I mean, my first experience with this was my high school basketball coach. My first years of high school was with the best coach of my life. And when he played, was a good basketball player, but nothing great at all. But he knew the game so well. He knew how to coach women really well, like perfect coach, but not a stellar athlete. And like, that doesn't take away from being a coach at all. Most of the time, it's really just how you learn how to coach and how you can apply all of the things you learn, and not necessarily if you're good at the sport at all.
Well, you have to love the sport, right? And love the science, love the ins and outs of the game or whatever.
Have time for your athletes.
Yeah. My little brother, the middle child in our family, is an exceptionally good coach and has been since he was like a high schooler, like coaching little kids, basketball and stuff. And he like really loved the sport, loved football, loved basketball, loved baseball, loved it. Was not like inherent, like not naturally gifted to be, an exceptional basketball player. He's, I think, like 5'9", 5'8", but like loves basketball. But it was like he loved the game, and he loved being part of it. And I think that was like that makes him a really good coach, and a good listener and a good teammate. And so it's like there are different things that are really important besides someone's running credentials. That being said, like if you're going to do a 200-mile race, it's probably okay to have someone who has experience trying to run 100+ mile distances. That being said, like I started coaching 200+ mile athletes before I did the Tahoe Rim Trail, and like had to learn with them really quickly, and had to, do the things like go out to crew and go out to volunteer at these 200-mile races so I could learn about them, because it was a whole new world. And so it's like, there's some things where you want experience in the field, but you don't have to be the very best in the field to be really, really solid at helping you get to the finish line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What else? What else do you think is super important about coaching? I think my last big thing, I think, is you really need to trust your coach. And what I mean by that is that I've watched athletes not tell their coach the whole story because they're worried the coach is going to take away miles from them, or change their training plan, or not let them do X or Z or Y workout. And I think it's really important to recognize that like the best thing for you as an athlete to get the most out of your coach-athlete relationship is to like communicate well and really trust that this person has your best interest in mind.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that can take time.
Long time.
Right? Like, I mean, I remember that kind of, and I'm laughing saying this, and I think Corrine, maybe you have personal experience with this. I can be quite skeptical. And
no, never. Hilly goat.
Oh, I mean, Keely has it too from me and just being around me in general. But no, but like specifically when things really matter to me, I can be very like protective, and like I don't really want to share that with someone unless I really trust them. And it took me a while. Like Adam and I had a personal relationship. Like he was just a good friend of mine for several years before he started coaching me. And I remember this specific moment where he came to me and he was like, Hillary, let me coach you. This is literally when I was still on freaking scooter after my accident. And he's like, let me coach you. He's like, I know like there's not much we can do right now, but he's like, I know that we can get you back to where you want to be. And he's like, let me be a part of your team, something like this. And it was just like so caring. And just at that moment, I was like, holy moly, like I can trust this person. And like letting that kind of pressure off of myself, right?
Yeah,
that I was
let your guard down.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important. So it takes a while, but I think you can get that gut feeling pretty quickly on, even if that trust takes a while to develop. And I think that like, that's for me, one of the most important things, because coaching is such a personal relationship. Like every runner, like they're coming to you to get a coach because it means a lot to them. They're pretty serious about it. Like
you're investing money in it, right? That's another big piece of it. You're investing money in it. Yeah. And there's no right coaching price. The right coaching price is the thing that fits in your budget. And if for some reason you have a really, really small budget, like talk to that person, like they might have a sliding scale, et cetera. Like it's a business, but at the end of the day, like that is something like that is the reality, right? Is that coaching costs money. So
totally.
I think investing a lot in it.
I think there's one thing that if you are thinking about getting a coach, that you should ask yourself. And that is, if you think you're coachable. I have a lot of consult calls with people who started off with a phrase around being uncoachable and being proud of their ability to be uncoachable, and I'm uncoachable. And to me as a coach, that means that you're not quite ready for a coach. You're not quite ready to be helped in your journey to run or to fuel or to train or to do whatever it is that you haven't been doing well. And so, if you are looking for a coach, but you still find yourself resisting being coached, it might just be, you need a little bit more time with yourself to figure out like why you're resisting that so much.
Why can't you trust this person to have your best interest in mind? Why can't you I think that's because once again, like we don't like coachability doesn't mean that you have to listen to everything your coach says, right? Like you can listen to your body, you can ask questions, et cetera. But if you are resistant to, because I tell this to athletes all the time, which I think piggybacks off of this perfectly, and piggybacks is a funny word. Anyway, but the big thing being like the program that you believe in, like the coach in the program you believe in, even if it's like only 80% right for you, will work way, way better than the program that is 100% right for you that you don't believe in at all. And so like that coachability piece is like, you've got to figure out what's going on and why you're resistant to taking on help or listening to someone or having someone in your corner, because like you are all capable of like listening to someone else and having someone be part of your team. And so it's like, that's a personal, like you got to journal that one out, I think.
that's sports psychology in a nutshell. Like
Totally.
it's so good. And also like, I mean, I just said it too, like I'm skeptical. So how do you know if you're coachable? Okay. I know that I'm skeptical, but if I just need someone to talk it out with me, and then I'll be, okay, like that's a good point. I see this. And then being able to change your mind and accept someone else's advice to be able to change. I think that's the definition of how you can see if you're coachable or not.
Exactly. But if you're entering a relationship saying something along the lines of, oh, you know, I run 120 miles a week and I'm not willing to change, and I'm not typically very coachable, then to
what
me,
do you
like,
want
you're
out
not
of it?
ready for a coach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you have to be ready to like potentially make changes or tweaks or do something different, because whatever you're doing might not be working, I think is the idea there. You're seeking help. So you gotta be ready to receive it. Okay. We're going to wrap this one up because everyone's got places to be except for me. I just have more work to do per usual on a Monday. Society Slam. We have to give a special shout out. This is obviously audio, but there's also video. Keely, I know that you have your mug on your desk right now. Hold it up.
Oh, mine's downstairs.
Yay. Okay.
What color is yours, Corrine?
Mine's the licheny green color.
Yeah, I think that's what mine is too. I love it.
So big shout out to Kelly Newland over at Rad, Real Athlete Diets. She runs this Do Epic Shit like thing every year where she gives out kind of like 10 awards to the community members that have been nominated by other people from the community over the course of the year. We were very honored to be part of that list this year. And so Kim Mitchell, Abby Hall's mom, makes mugs as awards for it every year. And we all received our mugs in the past like week, and they're beautiful. And I've had a bunch of coffee out of mine. And thank you, Kelly and Rad, for running that every year. It means a whole heck of a lot. So Society Slam, before we let you all go. Keely, you ready? Keely, Hillary, one of you slamming?
Really cool. For starting the new trail.society on Instagram. Go give us a follow. Got a lot of cool DMs. So that can be your preferred way to slide into our DMs if you want. So got some really cool DMs over the past week or so. And I know we are, a North American pod based out of here, but we do have a lot of listeners across the globe, which is really cool. Corrine and I found out about that in South Africa when we were both over there. But one that we wanted to highlight in Australia. So I am going to butcher this name. So Corrine, you have to help me. Echna Murray. Do you think I said that right? Eshana?
No idea.
Okay.
She is the happiest runner in the whole world, though. Yes. I was following this via Instagram and just the happiest little marathoner I've ever seen.
So maybe she won't be mad if I butcher her name. So Echana Murray Bartlett. She just ran 150 marathons in 150 days. That's insane. So she took the world record. And she was also raising money.
By a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Like
I don't even know what it was.
20, yeah. I think it was 122.
Okay.
It's been reset a lot in the past 18 months.
Yeah. She also did it not in a traditional setting, from one location. She did it kind of in a more of a point to points kind of way.
Yeah, she ran across Australia.
Yeah.
Which is so cool. And I remember one of her posts early on, because I was following this as well. She'd posted a collab with the Australian Center for Wild Habitat or something, basically showcasing how to have the knowledge to know how to respond to all these different bites of insects and animals in Australia, because there's a lot of dangerous things there.
Yeah.
And so she had a lot of different things she was kind of juggling while she was doing this run. It was really, really fun to watch her. And yeah, she was always so excited.
Joy of running.
Really cool. Congrats to her.
Yeah.
Right. Raised 120K, very, very cool run in general. But I guess, okay. So the big shout out I wanted to give, which was just brought, and I'm sure a bunch of you got this feedback as well, is that you all really loved our interview with Lauren Fleshman, and it meant a lot to a lot of you. It allowed many of you to have conversations with your young athletes in your house, with each other, with therapists. There were bits and pieces of that conversation that really hit home with a lot of people about, advocating for yourself, about your own body and how you feel about your body, about coachability and compliance, about all these little pieces. And I think it was really, really cool to have such an outpouring of just hearing from all of you how much the interview meant. So we wanted to give a big shout out. Thank you, Lauren, for being on. And thank you to everyone who listened to that episode. It meant a lot. And I'm sure it did really well in the downloads. So big thumbs up to the community there.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone who's followed the podcast so far. We're almost at 1,000 followers in less than a week. So thank you to everybody.
Yay. Okay. So that everyone can get to their next thing, because that's how this world works. Thank you all for listening. Subscribe, like, follow, share, all the things. I feel like we're probably on YouTube right now, so I'll like point down at the subscribe button. But until next time, we'll see you on the trails.